supply chain attacks are not new. They're evolved over time a lot. And there are many, many categories of targets.
If we think about like the attacker mindset, they're looking for the weakest link. And sometimes the most obvious target, the real target, which has all of the juicy data or crown jewels, that's probably well protected.
If you're targeting a company that provides to other companies, you have to do a couple of things. First one is try to understand exactly what is that package that they provide. Okay. The second one is try to infiltrate within that company.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cybercrime from the Frontline, a new episode with my good friends here. We're going to talk about supply chain attacks and discuss supply chain effects, posture and security. I have here Dragos, I have Raf, and I have Christina. I'll let each and one of you guys to introduce yourself. For those of you who don't already know you, this is the host, Dan Berthet. Please take it from here.
Thank you, Dan, and lovely to be here again. So, hello everybody. My name is Gavlus Dragos. I'm the Vice President of Threat Research here in Bitdefender. And while most of my team do cover everything related to detection and response, there are plenty of scenarios where we actually, stumble against supply chain attacks, and we need to have various, let's say, forms of tackling with these cases.
Hi, I'm Rafael Perret, and I'm a Director of Product Management here at Bitdefender.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm Christina, and I am a Senior Manager at Bitdefender, and I lead the forensic and the investigation team for more than 15 years.
Awesome. I'm always stoked to have you guys on because, the experience that you guys bring at one table is insane. So, supply chain, one of those terms again. I mean, of course, we kind of hint, if I've never heard about it, I kind of guess what it's about, what we referred it to be. But what's our definition of a supply chain and their attack?
We can think about supply chain attacks as having the visibility and information about every piece of software or hardware that you might get when you buy something or when you're using something. So, by the way, I think everybody is using some sort of software, like, you're using Chrome or you're using, an Adobe software or something like this. What most of the people don't necessarily know is that those software are not built entirely by one team. They also use another software or another pieces or libraries that they can get from a different team. And that team by itself can also use some smaller libraries that they get from another team and so on. So pretty much we can...
are not necessarily the same company.
Not necessarily the same company.
Open source project somewhere, another company.
It could be like everything. It could be like an open source company. It could be somebody that actually, provides a small service to, to the larger company and so on. What's important here to know is that in most of the scenarios, you don't actually know the supply chain. You don't actually, you never actually heard about the company that produces maybe a very important part of a software. And while this is relevant, this is also targetable. Now, let's try to make a parallel with, robbing a bank. You need to transfer some money from one bank to another. So you can make sure that the money are secured within your bank, that you're moving into a secure car, that everything is, okay there and something like this. But that car, and will, for the sake of this scenario, let's say that they need new tires and they buy some tires from some local shop, something there, and somebody who wants to, rob that car is going to discuss with them, hey, provide them this type of tires that are, worse, they have some issues, something like this, so that during the way something will break there, so I will get a chance. Now, you wouldn't necessarily think about this because they are a small thing within the entire chain. You don't necessarily know about them. But from an attacker perspective, this is a very interesting entry point that they can actually use. Coming back to what's happening in supply chain attacks, this could be a B2B2B scenario. This could be a B2B2C scenario. This could be a C2B2B scenario. So it could be like, I'm a small developer. I'm having an open source repository, but my repository is being used by, a very large company for something there. And, I'm happy if somebody wants to push something, add some more code in my repository. I don't have necessarily like a very good let's say, security hygiene in terms of analyzing all of the code. I'm just me. I cannot, evaluate every push, every fork that is being done on my repository. The fact is, people actually trust me because they use my software for a longer period of time. So whenever they see something from me, they just use it without actually knowing that I might be breached, but I'm not that relevant in that scenario. So the target actually is the final one, the one that is more prevalent in terms of the user. This is what a supply chain attack is, and it's not just software, it's hardware, it's everything that implies somebody provides some sort of service to another one that will further be used.
If we think about like the attacker mindset, they're looking for the weakest link. And sometimes the most obvious target, the real target, which has all of the juicy data or crown jewels, that's probably well protected. But that organization is probably using bits and pieces from hundreds of manufacturers, vendors, service providers. And one of those probably doesn't have as secure the baseline or a posture as the main one. And so you can go in through there.
Right. What's the typical application? Is obviously software most of the time, but I mean, we know of enough hardware manufacturers that obviously have a long supply chain through different continents and different countries. But I think there's a significant difference between the software and the hardware as well, in the upgradability and the changes that you can do through that, right? So from the perspective of...
Well, so if you're thinking about pace of change, like let's say in the hardware supply chain, you can check your vendors. It doesn't change as often. In software, it changes all the time. So we talked a little bit about open source.
Right.
Today, the vast majority of teams use a lot of different open source libraries to do everything from facilitating, encryption to compression or, UI tools. You don't need to reinvent everything every time. So you're going to use these open source packages, and you're probably updating these regularly to make sure that you get the last greatness, but you're not checking that code that's getting updated. So what we're seeing in some of these cases is either the developer, that sometimes lone developer that's been putting in all this work for free for the software that so many people use, gets frustrated. So there was a little bit of a wave of that, and then decides to break their own code, push an update. If you're updating automatically from all those things, you might realize only when you're in kind of deep stages of testing, or worst case production, when this really hits you. You also have malicious actors that decide to target the software supply chain because the leverage they get is so much bigger. If you attack one company, you can get access to a single company's assets and monetize that. If you target the company that provides the security, in the example of, say, the badge machine at all of the buildings, well, you can access a lot more companies.
For sure.
And so in hardware world, it's difficult because you can't really scale like physically moving. The software world, like we've seen attacks where, and these luckily some were caught very, very early on, where in compression algorithms, or there's a very discrete piece of code that goes in unannounced in an update that just happens to enable an attacker to see everything that's going on. Right. So things like that.
By the way, to Raf's point, while I don't necessarily want to hint that there was a supply chain attack with that package, but maybe one of the most widely used free libraries, the one for using zip compression. Like I'm pretty sure that more than 50-60% of the software around the world use it. So if you manage to snitch something there, then you obviously have like a really wide market where you can do some things. So that's the basic idea. And I'm pretty sure that if you ask somebody, like a programmer or somebody, they know about zip. But if you just ask a regular person, hey, do you know what kind of libraries are being used in this package? They might know the actual program, but they might know nothing about that library. So
just the same way that physically, if you think about just this room that we're in, from how many different vendors, providers, manufacturers did all of the bits and pieces come? And it is going to be hundreds, thousands, and software is going to be the same.
Right. So I was thinking, I was going to ask you how the supply chain applies to endpoint and cloud services, maybe.
So when you're thinking about an endpoint, you're thinking about typically, you know, a laptop, desktop, server. When you think about the supply chain, yes, there is a hardware aspect of that, but that's typically the one where there are some attacks. They're extremely sophisticated state-sponsored actors that do that. But generally, what's going to be the consideration for most organizations is the software side of that. So if you think about these machines, what is running on them? If it's a server with an application that you developed, what are all of the libraries, the dependencies, the open source packages, or, you know, if you've licensed some software from others that's included in there? How confident are you of the state of that, and how does it evolve? Are you automatically pulling the latest version of something? Are you waiting a little bit, seeing how it plays out for everyone else, manually updating those? So that's kind of on the library side or for servers. For workstations, it's going to be the applications that you've installed, that your users are installing on there. Is any of those applications potentially malicious? That's the straightforward one that we know that we consider directly to be kind of malware. But then what are all of the dependencies of those? On the cloud side, typically it's not going to be that. It's going to be what are the services that you use, and are those a risk? They are your suppliers in a sense. So even though you might have done everything correctly, if you've got a, you know, a supplier of a SaaS software for HR or finance that's not well protected, well, then the attacker has all of your information on your employees or your customer database or things like that, even though you were not breached. And so that's another type of risk.
Do you have some examples you guys can share?
Yeah, sure. We can share some examples. First of all, what I like to say is that supply chain attacks are not new. They're evolved over time a lot. And there are many categories of targets a supply chain can have. Actually, one of the first cases that was documented was back in 2013. The targets were the Target stores from US, which is one of the biggest supplier there. And the supply chain attack was done through the HVAC components that handling the temperatures in stores and the consumption of energy. And only in just a few days, the attackers managed to push the malicious piece of code into all of the point of sales in the Target stores. And they were able to capture card information from, if I remember well, 40 million customors back then. So the damages were actually huge.
So if I remember correctly, for a lot of time, the focus was on the point of sale units, on the payment devices themselves, unbeknownst to anybody that the actual attack started somewhere else, and the vulnerability wasn't even directly there, which there was, because that was they were, well, I believe network, right? But yeah. So and how long do you remember the details of how long it took them to realize the? I mean, it was obviously they would have had the point of sale. Because the payment machines were obviously compromised because that's how they lost the data, but they didn't really know how the attack did work. Yeah, fascinating. I do remember that was insane.
Another important moment, sort of saying in this type of attacks, was in 2017. When the first ransomware was distributed through a supply chain attack. The attackers managed to compromise a tax accounting application that was used vastly in Ukraine. And through that application, they managed to push NotPetya, which was known to destroy data. So the scope of the attack was not the ransomware, the ransom itself, the money. It was to destroy data and to disrupt the actions that those companies were doing in Ukraine.
Yeah, this is actually a good example to Raf's point. You might do everything to protect yourself. You're just using some software from someone else. You trust that they do the, in this case, an account software. You trust that they do the proper thing, and then you end up, you don't have any data, you don't know why. It just happens because you don't know everything that happens on the back end of those software that you trust.
Exactly. And to again to Ralph's point, another example where a certain category of users were a target was in 2018, when they actually the developers were targeted. The official repository of Python, which is a very well-known programming language used by very, very many developers, was attacked and was disrupted. And through one of the packages, they were able to infect the developers with a kind of keylogger. They were monitoring keystrokes, and when they identify crypto transactions, they managed to change the wallet to one of the attackers. And they did that because back then, in 2018, the developers were the ones who were actually doing this kind of transaction. They were not very known back then.
Right.
So it was a very targeted attack for this category of.
And that was the only thing that it did. They just
Yes.
Okay.
It's like, oh, send this much money to so and so, and just swap the account number.
Right.
And it's a brilliant.
I mean, you're right. 2018, the development world was probably mining or into because they understood and were excited about the.
And by the way, if I remember correctly, the package that they were targeting was Colorama,
Yes.
very well-known package in Python that you can write colors on the screen, but known meaning that a lot of people are using for different tasks. So I just want to print some logs. Some lines are red, some are green. I'm just using this package. So if I just also mine something, then just creating a program that simply logs some things will actually invite them in. So you don't have any idea. You're just saying this does nothing. This just analyze something, print some color line. But in the backend, you already have a code that actually.
How many people infected in this attack? Do you remember?
I don't remember exactly, but
Thousands to tens of thousands, probably. Who knows?
Probably because it's it was a package. Everybody that was actually using it would be.
I mean, another one like that caused a lot of trauma recently was Log4j. Right, Log4j is your code wasn't vulnerable, but you were using a library for logging that made you vulnerable.
Right.
And then so there's the direct vulnerability of if you're the one developing an application, but then all of your suppliers that are probably also using this are now vulnerable themselves, and you are then vulnerable via them. So you can have like supply chain risks at multiple levels.
Yeah. And by the way, if in particular, if it's something that powerful like logging, because everybody logs some things at some point, it was also fairly easy to test. So think about it. You have like a regular form of somehow. You don't necessarily need to know, but usually people are logging if you're trying to log in, if you're trying to add some actions. You're just logging that action. So all you have to do is just apply the vulnerability in your username or your password, because the moment they are going to try to log in, if somehow they are using log4j somewhere around the path, you might actually hit them. So fairly easy to target. Also, you don't necessarily need to know the entire usability for the package.
Yeah, and well, lastly, let's say I don't want to take all the space. Another important category is impacting technology giants, and we have some example of those. One of it was Asus in 2019, I think. They were compromised, and through an update, most of their clients were infected, and it is known that some of them were actually targeted because in the binary code they were identified by MAC addresses, I think. And because of that, in 2019 in US, measures were taken, and one of the most important ones was that Secretary of Commerce, I think, was empowered to refuse transaction, and that led to the ban of the giant technology Huawei in US. Actually, we have some more of those. We have SolarWinds, which was huge in 2020. We have Kaseya, which was impacted in 2021, I guess. And they're going further and further in time. And we have like the latest one, which is the GitHub supply chain with the NPM packages that stole secrets and tokens and
Published
transactions.
it online. And,
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why that was successful. There's almost nobody on GitHub, really. So nobody.
Definitely not developers that would then reuse it
No way, no.
or propagate the word.
So what's the biggest of them all? Like, who takes the cake? Is it
So the biggest one,
the big
SolarWinds.
SolarWinds, right?
100%. Yeah, and nobody actually knew that this was the biggest one. So nobody actually knew. Actually, I don't think anybody has heard about SolarWinds until they were hit like this. So SolarWinds built a software that was used to create some sort of asset repository on your, you're going to put the software on your, endpoints and get some information like, what are the programs that you have installed there, this kind of stuff. The amount of free space that you can have. So it's some form of management tools. Nobody actually knew a lot about things except for maybe the IT zone or some people that are actively using it. It became famous, and by the way, what happens is that they got breached. They got breached for a while. So after months of investigation, it looks like that they got breached for at least 8-9 months before people actually understood the attack. It looks like the entry point was because of some password that were wrongly updated to a Git repository by an intern of their own. So that was the entry point. But ultimately, what they actually did, and this is actually the important part, is that they modified the package. And at this point, let's clarify a little bit one key aspect of the supply chain attack. If you're targeting a company that provides to other companies, you have to do a couple of things. First one is try to understand exactly what is that package that they provide. Okay. The second one is try to infiltrate within that company. Okay, yeah. Now you can do this in various ways. You can try to find, a weakest link, maybe some employee there. But the idea is to reach, the degree of infection within that company where you have visibility across usually the build server. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be the build server, but that's a good place to start. Now, let me explain a couple of scenarios here. So let's say Raf is the developer. I managed to breach him. Now, what I can do is from his laptop, I can look at the code, add some code of my own that will do the, malware part and push it. Now, I can do this, but, the push will be recorded. Someone else, maybe somebody in terms of the procedure will review it, will ask Raf, hey, what's with this code here, and so on. So I can do this. It's, let's say, maybe easier, but, in practice, it's not going to be that good. The second will be, maybe I can get to where the actual code is being built or to the actual repository, assuming it's a local repository. Now, if I get there, then I can try to modify it some sort. There are going to be some logs there, but it's going to be a little bit, let's say, more complicated for somebody to actually notice this. Now, the ideal part will be to be exactly on the build system. Why? Because I can actually apply the patch live. So how will this work? Every time you're building a product, you actually, download all of the latest repository, build everything in a package, sign it, and then, send it to your customers. Now, from that moment where you download all of the samples to the moment where you build everything, that particular moment, which is, a couple of seconds, this is where I can inject myself and change a piece of the code. Now, if I do this, the repository per se will be clean. You'll find nothing there because I didn't actually modify the repository. I just modified something on the way. The result package will actually contain the malicious code, and furthermore, it's also going to be signed by this. So this will be the ideal place. One also very important thing is that if I manage to do this, usually, the artifacts from the building, like the object files and so on, are usually deleted. So I don't necessarily have to worry a lot about people finding something like this. So it is more complicated. It kind of implies me as an attacker understanding how your entire, build system works, but it could keep me really stealth there. Okay, so what they did is they managed to infiltrate the, the SolarWinds company. Okay, then they understood how these packages are being modified, and they modify some of these packages, to the extent that they could actually drop some malicious packages on some specific IPs. So they were actually targeting some victims. Now, why am I saying that this was by far the most important? Nobody heard about SolarWinds until people were starting to, step out and say, I'm also using SolarWinds, I'm also using SolarWinds, and then they started to see the magnitude of this. So initially, when it started, it was some companies that were investigating, nothing too fancy. Then at some point, larger companies started to say, yeah, I'm using SolarWinds. Then the government of United States started to say, yeah, I'm using SolarWinds, and in all branches, for example, in all military branches. So people start to say, okay, this doesn't look good. There are too many. All of the major accounting companies from United States were actually using SolarWinds. At that point, companies that were using building GPUs and so on, they were using SolarWinds. Microsoft at some point first announced that they have tested SolarWinds or something. Then they announced that they are using SolarWinds, but they weren't affected, and so on. So, if you look on the entire scope of this, there are too many companies, too many institutions from United States that were using that software. And when they actually started to look on the type of IPs that they were targeting, for example, it was the Department of Defense and stuff like this. So, people started to say, okay, this is really serious. So if, the actual attackers will have access to the type of components that we have here, then they could get like a lot of data. I think the most important rule here is to actually understand that nobody actually thought this was a problem until they understood the extent. SolarWinds was not on the radar. It was a big company, but it was not on the radar because, everybody knew all of the other companies that were using SolarWinds. They were, larger companies. Everybody knew about them. Everybody. Nobody actually knew that all of them were using this. But from an attacker perspective, yeah, that was a gold mine.
And I think like something to keep in mind here is that for attackers, particularly attackers that are extremely stealthy, very advanced, sophisticated, these are, state-sponsored actors, the stealth component is essential. And when they're going through a supply chain attack, the benefit that they get is that they get broad distribution, which they can then cherry pick because they're trying to be stealthy of the vast, large number, I think it was like tens of thousands of companies that could have been attacked. Only a much smaller number were attacked. What I mean by that is that all of those companies had the vulnerability kind of introduced. They could have been, if the attacker wanted to, boom, you're hacked. But they weren't because their objective was primarily stealth to stay longer. Right. And they cherry-picked. But if you think about it from a security perspective, like everyone got, they got hacked. They didn't do anything with it.
No, everybody was vulnerable and potentially exposed.
Well, they were, it's like the thief that comes into your hacks and picks your front door. Yeah. And then decides not to go in, right? Like, okay, they didn't go in, but they picked your front door. And so they picked the front door of all of these people in one go. If you think from an attacker's perspective, how much work and time and effort do you need to be able to, undetected, break into any single one of these organizations? And they did it for 17,000 or something like that in one go. So the appeal is enormous because of that scale.
So what are the, what would you say are the most typical verticals that are at risk from supply chain attacks?
From my perspective, the MSPs, because of this exponential potential of distributing an attack. Because if you compromise an MSP, you can then compromise all of its clients. So it's a chain of reactions, for example. And like I gave an example earlier, Kaseya was actually this case. The attackers managed to exploit their remote management software. And through that, they managed to compromise their clients, which most of them were MSPs. And through MSPs, they managed to infect further their clients. So even though Kaseya stated that they had 60 clients which were affected, 60 MSPs, the victims were around 1,500. And the final payload was a ransomware. So I think it was Rebel, which was huge back then. And they managed to encrypt all the stations from that 1,500 clients for the MSPs.
Actually, let's add another dimension here. So, which I think is very interesting, starting from what Christina says. So, by the way, I do agree with the assessment with the MSP, especially because most of these MSP tools actually provide you some form of administrative work. So, for example, one simple administrative thing that you can do is run something there.
Right.
And they have privileges.
And they have privileges. So it's pretty much, if you have access there, then you can pretty much do whatever you want on the endpoints. But there is also another aspect. Most of these MSPs run together with the security product. So in order, because they have this kind of, let's say, privileges, they don't want to be bothered by the security product. So what they actually do in many scenarios is that they add an exclusion within the security product for the MSP per se, meaning that if you run something from the MSP, it's unlikely for you to be actually be scanned.
It's trusted. This is a good guy.
Yeah, this is trusted. This actually makes quite easy for an attacker, because he's not just going to have like a direct line to, you know, a potential victim, but in this scenario, yeah, he has a direct line, and he's not going to be even checked or scanned in any way. I think the important keyword here to address is trust. And in many cases, you know, you're by the way, we can do this like a general question. I'm not saying it's something wrong, but you know, everybody's, you know, installing Chrome because it's Chrome. It's okay. Why not install it? It's clean. It has no issue. I'm not saying it has, but I'm pretty sure nobody actually asks, hey, what are the actual packages within Chrome? No, it's Chrome. It's clean. It's okay. I just trust it. That's maybe the major thing that we need to actually think about it.
Well, I mean, most of the time, you know, like your example of Chrome or any other piece of software that we use daily, and it's like, well, there's so many millions of people that use them, and there's just not been any reports that say that deep down embedded in a open source library there was something waiting to be deployed, and that just makes us think it's fine. But we were talking about it, and I kept thinking, and I always think, so especially in the hardware side where it can get kinetic too, and there's recent examples for it. What's insidious about it is just you just don't know, because they could be 3 layers deep in a vendor of a vendor of a vendor, where your supply chain can get compromised, and then you can get into trouble. So please tell me there's some sort of a solution for this.
Well, yeah. There are some, there are some solutions, and we definitely need to think about this. Now, what is the uncommon thing with the supply chain attack is that you have a software that, like you said, millions of people know that it doesn't do anything wrong, and suddenly changes its behavior. But suddenly, this is the uncommon thing. So if you can actually find a way to measure this, like what is the common behavior and what actually changed, how the product actually change in terms of how it behaves, then you may actually identify a supply chain attack being triggered. And this could be generic. So yeah, there are some solutions, but it's not going to be, let's say, a solution that implies a general cybersecurity solution, that uses the same type of detection for everyone. Why? Well, another key aspect that, Ralph pointed out is that some of them are triggered. So you're not going to see the same, the same thing on all of the customers. You might, but you might not. But in many cases, this will not happen. So what you will need in this scenario is a security solution that is able to learn the way you're actually using the software and then identify scenarios where the software behaves in a completely different manner on how you normally use it over a period of time. This actually means a customized, tailored security for your needs that could be different, that could actually translate that, hey, something is strange here. It's not a regular way, or not the normal way that could, this behave. Now, this is definitely not 100% security, but it is something that works. It cannot provide 100% detection rate because, let's be frank, let's take the example that Christina has with one MSP. Now, if within my line of customers, I always run PowerShell on their endpoints to do some things there through the MSP on a daily basis. Now, if at some point somebody breaches me and runs another PowerShell there, maybe similar to what is mine, it's kind of hard to say what's different. But if I don't do something like this, and in so many cases this is actually what's happening, then yes, I can actually differentiate between this type of behaviors. But this is an approach that has to be done. Now, it's not the only approach.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the more traditional approach, which I think we quickly realize has its limits, right? So, for example, there's this idea of like the SBOM, so software bill of materials. This is to say, like when you're looking at a software, you're buying a software, you know what it's made of, kind of like the ingredients list when you're looking at a food packaging.
But what if I'm not able to judge?
Well, so the problem is even if you do have that list, so what?
Exactly. Yeah. It's like I don't.
And then the list is often, it'll have some other product that you don't know well enough. And then even if you could get, which you probably can't because you're not directly a customer, et cetera, have that other list. So we do see this practice of wanting SBOM, and we should do as much as we can of that. Realistically, it won't catch everything, right? And sometimes there's nothing that you can do up front that will be sufficient. So you should close as much as possible, but that's where profiling comes in, because the example I gave earlier of I think basically it was a man-in-the-middle piece of code that was detected. It was detected by an engineer at I think it was one of the tech giants, who just didn't understand why the latest version of a package seemed to be affecting performance a tiny little bit on his machine. And then so he dug in. And if you think about it from a profiling perspective, then that might be something that you could detect, just the same way as like behaviors being different, connections to new places. That's going to be a much broader net, right? So like many things in security, you shouldn't take a one-size-fits-all approach, because if you do one thing really well, attackers will just find a way around it. So, you need to cover all of those. So do software bill of materials, understand your third-party risk, right? But also make sure that like you still have another layer to catch whatever might be missed.
All right. I don't think we're going to get to the bottom of the supply chain to get to understand where the attack goes, but these are fascinating data points that I'm very thankful that you brought through, and some visibility and knowledge and what's possible. I really want to thank you again for your work in the field, and I'm really happy to have you back. So you're always welcome. I'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you very much.